300 men stood against 1,000,000. One king became immortal. But here is the dirty secret that history books have conveniently scrubbed from the pages. The hero of Thermopylae was also the architect of the most brutal, state-sanctioned murder system the ancient world ever saw. And those 300 Spartans, they weren't the only ones who died at his command. Every single year, Leonidas oversaw the ritual slaughter of thousands of innocent people, not Persians, but Greece's own enslaved population. The very survival of Western civilization supposedly rested on this man's shoulders, but what if the cure was actually worse than the disease? By the end of this video, you will understand why the real Leonidas was simultaneously Greece's greatest hero and its most efficient monster. You will discover the horrifying training that forced children to murder for food, why Leonidas chose a suicidal death over a tactical withdrawal, and the systematic genocide he enforced that makes Persian barbarism look like a tea party. You think you know this story, the noble king, the impossible odds, the ultimate sacrifice, but hidden beneath the bronze and the legend is a mathematical impossibility that shatters the myth. 300 versus 1,000,000? Try 7 helots murdered for every 1 Spartan citizen every single year. That is not war. That is extermination. 3 mysteries haunt the real Thermopylae. What happened to the Helot rebellion of 490 BC that Leonidas crushed? Why did a tactical genius choose certain death when retreat was entirely possible? And what was the Crypteia, the secret murder program that Leonidas himself survived and later commanded? To understand how one man could be both savior and monster, we need to go back to a blood-soaked night in 490 BC, where a prince learned that the price of power is absolute brutality. Sparta wasn't a city-state, it was a prison camp masquerading as a civilization. By 490 BC, this military machine ran on a simple, terrifying equation: complete dominance through complete terror. But here is what the histories won't tell you. Sparta's greatest enemy wasn't Persia. It was the 250,000 human beings they kept in chains, the helots. Leonidas, whose name means lion's son, wasn't born to be king. He was the third son, the spare, hardened by a childhood that would break most adults. He was a product of the agoge, a training system that didn't create soldiers, it manufactured killers. At age 7, Leonidas was torn from his mother's arms and thrown into a world of calculated cruelty. Boys slept naked on reed beds, were starved to force them to steal, and were beaten if caught, not for stealing, but for being clumsy. But the true horror began at 18 with the Crypteia. The most promising killers were sent into the countryside with nothing but a dagger and a single order: kill helots, any helot, especially the strong ones. Leonidas excelled. His instructors noted his efficiency, his ability to disconnect from the act of murder. When he returned with 17 confirmed kills, they knew they had created a monster. Then fate intervened. His half-brother, King Cleomenes, died under mysterious circumstances, found in prison, supposedly a suicide, though the wounds suggested otherwise. Leonidas ascended to the throne, a man trained to kill without remorse, now holding the power of a king. His first act, intensifying the agoge. His reasoning was simple: Persia grows strong, Sparta must grow harder. He began selecting his 300 warriors years before Thermopylae, not for their skill but for their bloodline. He wanted men with sons, men whose legacy would survive their death. But hidden in plain sight was an even more shocking truth. Each Spartan would bring 7 helots as support. That is 2,100 enslaved humans marching to certain death, their names erased from every record. When the Persian threat materialized in 481 BC, Leonidas wasn't preparing for defense. He was preparing for a glorious suicide. The oracle at Delphi had whispered a prophecy: either Sparta will fall, or a Spartan king will die. Leonidas had already made his choice. Dawn, August 480 BC. The march to Thermopylae began with a lie. Leonidas told the ephors he was leading a sacred guard to a festival. In reality, he was marching 300 Spartans and 2,100 helots into a meat grinder. Behind them came 6,700 other Greeks, Thespians, Thebans, Corinthians, allies who thought they were fighting for freedom, not realizing they were pawns in a Spartan propaganda coup. The pass of Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, was a narrow choke point, perfect for a massacre. 50 feet wide, cliffs on one side, sea on the other. Leonidas walked the ground like a man selecting his own grave. Then came the sound no soldier ever forgets, the rumble of 200,000 Persians. Xerxes sent envoys offering terms: submit and keep your lands. Leonidas's response? He had the messengers watch as Spartans executed a group of helots for cowardice. The message was clear: we are not reasonable men, we deal in death. The psychological warfare had begun. The battle began at 5:47 a.m. on day 1. Xerxes sent his Medes first, expendable troops to test the Spartan resolve. What happened next was a slaughter. The Spartan phalanx moved like a single organism, a hedge of bronze and iron that ground everything in its path. In 15 minutes, 500 Medes lay dying in the dust. But look closer. Who dragged away the wounded? Who held the flanks? Who died in droves to protect the Spartan masters? The helots. For every Spartan that fell, 7 helots perished. The ground turned into mud, not from rain, but from blood. Then came the immortals, 10,000 of Persia's elite. They had never been defeated, but they had never faced the graduates of the agoge. It wasn't courage that made the Spartans superior, it was programming. Where Persians fought to live, Spartans had been taught to die. The killing became mechanical: thrust, twist, withdraw, step over the corpse. Persian arrows darkened the sky, but the Spartans just laughed. "Good," said Denekes, "then we shall fight in the shade." But beneath the bravado was calculation. Every Spartan carried only what he could use. Every helot carried the replacements. By noon, Persian casualties mounted toward 2,000. Spartan losses fewer than 50. The narrow pass neutralized the Persian numbers. It was a killing field, 50 feet wide, but Xerxes had more than numbers. He had gold, and gold buys betrayal. Ephialtes, a local Greek, showed the Persians the Thermopylae path, a secret route through the mountains that would flank the Spartan position. Leonidas knew about this path. Archaeological evidence suggests he had even placed markers there. He knew the betrayal was coming. In fact, he was counting on it. When the news of the encirclement reached the Greek camp, any competent commander would have retreated. Save the army, fight another day. Leonidas had hours before the trap snapped shut. But he didn't retreat. He smiled that cold reptilian smile the agoge had perfected. "Continue," he ordered. He dismissed the allies, the Corinthians, the Arcadians, telling them to go home and tell the world that Sparta held. But he kept the Thespians who volunteered, and the Thebans, whom he held as hostages, and the helots. He gave orders that would chill your blood. Hold the wings, absorb the arrows, buy time with your bodies. The final stand wasn't a battle, it was orchestrated mass suicide. As the Persians closed in from both sides, Leonidas ordered the advance into open ground. "Tonight we dine in Hades," he roared. But first, he ordered the helots to be killed, not by Persians, but by Spartans. No witnesses. No slaves returning to speak of the Spartan reality. The Thebans tried to surrender and were cut down. The Thespians fought bravely and died to a man. Leonidas fell early, pierced by 20 arrows. His body became the focal point of the battle. Spartans and Persians fought over his corpse like wolves over a carcass. When their spears broke, they fought with swords. When swords broke, they fought with hands and teeth. Finally, Xerxes, sickened by the slaughter, ordered his archers to finish it. The sky turned black one last time. The last Spartan died with 40 arrows in his shield, still upright. The aftermath reveals the true horror. Persian dead, 20,000. Greek dead, 4,000. But the proportions tell the real story. Of the 300 Spartans, 298 died. Of the 700 Thespians, none survived. Of the 2,100 helots, the records go suspiciously silent. They simply vanished from history, just as Leonidas intended. Xerxes, in a rage, ordered Leonidas's body crucified and beheaded, a sacrilege that only cemented his martyrdom. The cover-up began immediately. The two Spartan survivors were shamed into suicide or reckless death in later battles. Survival was the only unforgivable sin. The narrative was crafted with precision. 300 Spartans against 1,000,000 Persians. No mention of allies, no mention of helots. The story spread faster than the truth could catch it. Leonidas had turned a military defeat into a propaganda masterstroke. His death united Greece. It gave them a martyr. It gave them a reason to fight. Within a year, the Greeks would crush the Persians at Salamis and Plataea. The sacrifice had worked, but it wasn't just the 300 who paid the price. It was the thousands of unnamed, unmourned slaves who died to protect a system that treated them like cattle. Modern forensics on the battlefield reveals uncomfortable truths. Helot skeletons show signs of malnutrition, men who marched to war already starving. Weapon distribution suggests they were placed specifically to absorb missile fire. They weren't auxiliary troops, they were human shields. Leonidas didn't just spend Spartan lives, he spent helot lives with the careless abandon of a gambler playing with someone else's money. Sparta's brutal system ultimately destroyed it. By 371 BC, barely a century after Thermopylae, Spartan dominance was broken forever. Why? Because they had killed too many of their own people. The citizen population had shrunk to unsustainable levels. The helots they had terrorized for centuries finally broke free. The city that lived by the spear quite literally died by it. But the myth outlived the reality. We have transformed the enforcers of a totalitarian slave state into the champions of freedom. If Leonidas returned today, he wouldn't recognize democracy or individual liberty. He would only recognize the willingness of the strong to crush the weak and call it virtue. The real lesson of Thermopylae isn't about courage, it is about how history is written by the survivors. It is about how propaganda becomes truth. 300 men stood against an empire, yes, but they stood on a foundation of bones, the bones of thousands of forgotten slaves. Leonidas was exactly what Sparta made him, a perfect killer who died a perfect death to ensure his victims' silence. Some monsters wear lion skins. Some monsters become heroes. And sometimes 2,500 years isn't long enough to wash the blood away. 300 Spartans and 20,000 forgotten dead. That is the real mathematics of Thermopylae. That is the real legacy of Leonidas. If this dark dive into history opened your eyes, smash that like button and subscribe. We dig up the bodies that history tries to bury. What do you think? Was Leonidas a hero or a monster? Let me know in the comments below.